After a few months in business, you may start to encounter some problems that all small business owners face. In this chapter, I'll go over 3 common problem areas, which are sales, employees, and overwork. Since there's never a one-size-fits-all solution for business problems, I'll explore the most common causes of each problem and provide possible solutions for each one. First, if your sales are not growing, or even worse, if your sales are falling, you need to examine the following 3 causes: your product, your location or locations, and weather. But before we get into it, you should only be worrying about low sales growth if you've been selling for at least 3 months. If you're complaining that your sales aren't really growing in your first month of business, slow down, baby. I don't know of any food truck that had a line wrap around the block within a month of opening. Let's start with the easiest cause, which is weather. If your area has had a lot of rain recently, it's raining sideways! Sales will definitely go down. But this is only temporary, so don't worry too much. But if your area has a consistently rainy time of year, like spring, when it might rain 4 out of 5 weekdays every week, you may want to consider laying off part of your staff for that specific time of year. If that's not an option, you may consider offering delivery through third-party apps, if they allow delivery to be done from food trucks in your area. But you should calculate what your margins will be before offering delivery. Remember that many delivery companies take a 30% cut of your sales. This may mean that you make less than $1 in profit for every item you sell. It's also natural for sales to slow down during winter if your area has cold winters. Again, consider laying off staff for that season and/or offering delivery. If even after implementing these changes, your truck is still barely breaking even during winter or any other time of year that has bad weather, you might want to temporarily shut down the truck for that season and get a temporary job somewhere else. A lot of ice cream truck owners do this. They operate only during the warmer months and either get a temporary job or just take time off in the winter. If you've determined that bad weather isn't the cause, the next place to look is your product. 9 out of 10 times, the main cause of low sales is that what you're offering isn't very good compared to other nearby trucks or restaurants. You should have already tried all the food and all the drinks near your truck, so you should have a pretty good idea of what the competition is like. If you haven't, you're dooming yourself to failure. If you don't know what you're up against, how do you expect to beat them?
Keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer.
Anyway, let's say that you already know the competition and you truly believe your food is the best. All of your employees may also agree. Maybe even all your current customers agree. So how come other trucks are outselling you?
I don't know, man.
When judging a food truck or restaurant, almost all owners focus solely on how the food tastes. This is an incredibly myopic view. Food isn't all about taste. What about price?
That'll be $16.
$16? That's expensive.
Yes, sir. Everything's very expensive because you're paying for it on an iPad.
I don't care if you sell the most delicious slice of pizza in all of New York City. If yours costs $10 a slice and there's another truck that sells a pretty good slice for $2.50, unless I win the lottery, I'm sticking with them. Or imagine it takes 10 minutes for you to dish out an order while other trucks dish out orders in less than 3 minutes. Or maybe your food is really good, but you park in a very touristy area where people are more interested in how pretty their food looks rather than how delicious it is. Or the employee working in the window at your truck is very efficient and never messes up an order, but rarely smiles or makes customers feel welcome. Now, don't get me wrong. Taste is most definitely the biggest reason that certain trucks do well.
Oh, most definitely.
But there's so many other factors besides taste that have an enormous effect on how popular a truck will be. Take a look at the following chart for starters. Each category can be scored from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest and 1 being the lowest. Using this chart, are you still confident that your truck can outscore all the other trucks or restaurants near you? Finally, if both weather and your products are not the problem, the last possible cause for low sales could be
Location, location, location.
perhaps there just aren't many potential customers in your area. Maybe your truck really is the best food option there, and you've peaked at only about 3 months in. It could also be that your food isn't a good fit for the area. If most of the people are health conscious and your truck sells greasy burgers, you might never do well, no matter how good your burgers are. It could also be that your food is just too expensive, like the example I gave in chapter 5 about trying to sell $30 lobster to college students. For all these reasons and more, it's important to use the first few months of business to test out a few different locations instead of parking in the same spot every day. It took us about a year before we settled on our current locations. Also, you need to think about what the clientele is like in the locations that you choose. Just because a location has a lot of foot traffic and little competition doesn't automatically mean you'll do well. Problem number 2, employees. As I mentioned in chapter 25, I would rather spend a month or 2 trying to hire a good employee than hire someone quickly and spend a month or 2 training them just to be half decent. But at the same time, I do understand that it's not always possible to spend that much time in the hiring process, which means inevitably you'll have 1 or 2 bad apples in your group. I found that employee problems can be grouped into the following 3 categories: attendance, performance, and cooperation. Let's first talk about attendance, which includes lateness and absence. The tone that you set with all your employees from their first day will have a big impact on how seriously they take lateness and absence. If an employee is a few minutes late a couple times during the first week or two and you let it slide, that employee is much more likely to continue being late in the future. 5 minutes turns into 10, 10 turns to 15. I'm not saying you should punish them every time they're more than a minute late. Instead, be understanding of their situation and talk to them one-on-one to see how they can avoid being late in the future. For example, in a metropolitan city, delayed trains and buses are perhaps the most common excuse that late employees give. In this case, I would tell them to always aim to arrive 10 to 15 minutes early to work. So just in case there's a delay, they'll have a much higher chance of showing up on time. If, after having a talk with them, they continue to be late, give them a formal warning and explain that if their lateness doesn't improve, you'll have to let them go. Frequent absences are also an attendance issue, and they're much more disruptive to service. Unless there's a medical emergency or a death in the family, I would immediately let go of any employee who skips work without any prior notification. Trust me, I've heard it all. My phone broke, my alarm didn't go off, a pipe burst in my apartment and it started flooding, so I had to wait for the super to come and fix it. I felt sick in the morning, so I went to the hospital and I had to wait in the emergency room for 4 hours, and by the time I got out, you guys were already done with service. My car died on the way to work, so I had to wait for a tow truck company to come and help me. And I tried calling you, but I couldn't get any reception.
Is that true?
I don't know. Yeah, it is.
Thank you, Michael. I know you're telling the truth.
Okay.
I can tell.
Remember, it's illegal for you to require written proof from an employee who misses work unless they're absent for at least 3 days in a row. So don't bother asking. If the employee is a parent, kid-related issues will probably be their #1 reason for missing a day or two of work from time to time.
I can't take the test. I have a stomach ache.
If your truck can handle it and the employee gives you enough notice ahead of time, it's up to you whether or not you want to keep them. On the one hand, it might seem unfair that the employee has to choose between his job and his child. But on the other hand, it's unfair for you to have to constantly worry about whether the employee will show up to work or not. It's also unfair for that employee to make a commitment to work for you and then break that commitment every few weeks, whether the situation is out of their control or not. If the absences become too disruptive, it may make sense to fire them now rather than later, because it's impossible for any employee to guarantee that they won't miss another day of work because they're kids. And you would be a fool to believe anyone who makes you that promise. If you give them a second chance, what may end up happening is a few weeks later, their kid becomes extremely sick and there's nobody to look after them. So your employee has to call out again. You then have to make the difficult choice of giving them another second chance or firing them. But if you fire them at that point, you'll forever be known to that employee and all your other employees as the person who fired someone for taking care of their sick child. And it won't matter how many second chances you gave them in the past.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
Aside from attendance, another common employee problem is poor work performance. I went over a lot of information regarding employee management and discipline in chapters 27 and 28. So review those 2 chapters first if you haven't done so already. If you feel like you've implemented the strategies to the best of your ability, but your employees are still not responding positively, it may be that you're not being specific enough in your feedback. For example, let's say you have an employee who is slow at assembling a burrito, and you've told them repeatedly in the past that he needs to be faster. The problem with this kind of feedback is, what exactly does faster mean?
Faster than the speed of love.
To you, it looks like he's moving way too slowly. But maybe from the employee's perspective, he's sped up considerably since you first spoke to him. Unless you can objectively measure his performance by timing him, there's no clear goal for him to reach for. Simply saying, move faster, isn't very effective. Instead, you should tell him, you need to assemble a burrito correctly in under 15 seconds, and then time him. This can achieve 2 things. 1, the employee can see just how slow he is compared to the standard speed and give him a clear objective goal to work towards. 2, it may show you that the employee maybe isn't as slow as you think he is, or maybe he's way slower than the standard, in which case it'll help you decide whether you should continue training him or find a replacement. To give you another example, let's say you've repeatedly told your employee at the register to be friendlier to customers. Again, what does friendlier mean? The employee might feel like he's already making a big effort to be friendlier and doesn't understand why you keep critiquing him.
What do you want?
It's not that simple.
What do you want?
Do you want him to smile more, make more small talk, make more eye contact, say something different when greeting customers? Maybe you want him to do all these things. Be specific, make a list, record video of his interaction with customers and review it together. Have him do a mock customer service experience with you. Basically, do whatever you need to do to make it absolutely clear about what you want that employee to achieve. The point is, don't immediately blame an employee for not improving quickly enough. Think about the feedback that you're giving him. Maybe you're the reason he's not meeting your standards. This just reinforces the need for a clear and comprehensive operations manual, which I talked about in chapter 24. Of course, if you really are giving clear-cut instructions, like wrap the sides of the burrito first and then the top and bottom, but the employee fails to consistently do so, he might not be the right fit for the job. The last common employee problem is cooperation or coworker relations. Obviously, every boss wants his employees to get along, but this doesn't always happen. It's natural for cliques or small groups to form within your larger group of employees. So don't try to force all them to be BFFs with each other.
We don't have to get along, we just have to work together.
No, we do have to get along. Can't we all just get along? Or have we forgotten the words of the Reverend King?
Instead, you want to foster an environment in which there's no bad blood or unnecessary tension among them. A common cause of coworker problems is gossip. Some people just can't help themselves.
I'm mad at you because I don't understand where Taylor would have heard something and repeated it incorrectly.
How the hell would frickin' Taylor know this information?
They gossip about their friends, customers, celebrities, and inevitably, their coworkers. The moment you hear an employee gossiping about a coworker, I would take him aside and explain that there's no place for that in your business. Explain that it's unprofessional and you don't want any sort of negativity within your team. Whether that employee thinks it's just a harmless little comment, says it was just a joke, or whatever. You don't need to yell at him or be super strict about it. Just explain it matter-of-factly and ask him not to do it again. If the gossip was about a coworker not doing their job properly or some other work-related issue, tell him to come to you or a manager rather than telling everyone else at work. If he gossips a second time, I'd give him a formal warning. Third time,
You are out of here!
It might seem harsh, but gossip always leads to problems. Therefore, it's best to stop it from even starting. Another common cause of coworker problems is a bossy or annoyed tone that an employee may have when speaking to his coworkers. For example, whenever John messes up an order, Jane will snap at him or just be very rude, sigh deeply, roll her eyes, and it doesn't matter if Jane is John's superior or has worked longer on the truck. Nobody, not even you, should be rude when addressing an employee or coworker. A lot of times, people that speak in a rude way don't actually know that they're doing so. You might not believe it, but it's pretty common with people who have younger siblings. They grow up so used to talking down to their younger siblings that it carries over into their professional adult lives, and they don't realize how they're talking. As their boss, it's your job to point it out and address it, but remember to be specific. If you tell her that her tone was harsh during today's service, she most likely won't know what you're talking about. But if you say something like, "Do you remember when John forgot to put peppers in the burrito today and you pointed it out to him?" It's good that you caught it before it went out to the customer, but I think the way that you said it to him might have been a bit harsh. Then you can suggest how she can deal with that kind of situation better in the future. Some employees may also seem bossy to others if the first group feels like the second group isn't working as hard or as quickly as they are. For example, let's say after service, John and Jane alternate between washing dishes and cleaning the truck. But because Jane has been working longer than John, she usually finishes faster than him and ends up having to help him finish his work every day. Therefore, she might tell John to speed up a bit so they can go home sooner.
I'd ask if you could hold us up more, but I'm not a big fan of rhetorical questions.
After a few times of hearing this, John gets annoyed and complains to you that Jane is always telling him to do stuff and acting like she's his boss. Ideally, you should have been monitoring each employee's work performance before this kind of situation arose. You should be the one talking to employees about their performance, not your other employees. Anyway, have a talk with both employees one-on-one and assure them that you'll be better about overseeing work duties and that if they ever have anything they want to say about work performance, that they should come to you first. Do you see what all employee problems have in common? If you do your job managing your employees properly, more than 90% of these issues won't exist. But don't beat yourself up too much. Managing a business is a constant learning experience, one that I continue to learn from every day as well. The important thing is to take quick action and always know as much as possible about what's going on, not with just your food or your sales numbers, but also within your team. The final common problem I'll be talking about is overwork. If your food truck is your first foray into the wonderful world of owning a business, the long hours and physical toll might come as a shock. Let me first show you what our first year in business was like. For Yumpling, my partners and I all worked close to 60 hours a week for the first year. Here's what a typical Monday to Friday schedule is like. 2 a.m., we pick up the truck from our commissary and drive out to Manhattan. Since we have 3 people among us, only one of us would need to drive out while the other 2 would get to sleep in. At 2:45, we find a parking spot and we sleep on the truck until morning. But as I mentioned in chapter 26, you can't really get a restful sleep on the truck, especially in the summer or winter.
I just wanna lay in my bed.
8 a.m., the person on the truck wakes up and starts making food for the day. At 9 o'clock, the remaining 2 partners join the truck to help out with cooking and general preparation. At 11:30, we open for service. At 2:30, we finish our lunch service. At around 3:30, we arrive back at our commissary and we prep food for the next day, clean the truck, and refill the truck. At around 6 o'clock, we finish at the commissary and go home. So this means if I had to drive out twice that week, I would start at 2 a.m. and work until 6 p.m. on, let's say, Monday and Thursday, which is 16 hours twice a week. On Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, I would start at 9 a.m. and still finish at 6 p.m., which is 9 hours 3 times a week. So far, our total is 59 hours. Then on Saturday, all 3 of us would mass prep ingredients for the following week and do a deep clean of the truck, which took around 6 hours. This brings our total to 65 hours. If one of us got sick, the other 2 would have to pick up the slack, which would potentially push the total hours to 80 hours or more for that week. The point is, if you're working 60 hours or more per week, one of the big reasons our hours were long was that we had to drive out at 2 a.m. just to secure a parking spot for that day. If you don't need to do this, you could potentially save up to 16 hours per week. Also, we made it a point from the very beginning that we wanted all the food to be as fresh as possible. So we prepped everything daily. If this isn't a requirement on your truck, this could save you possibly 10 hours or more per week. There are, of course, lots of things you could do to reduce your workload. For example, instead of deep cleaning your truck every week, maybe you could do it every other week without it making a huge difference in overall cleanliness. But for some things, it's better to actually spend the extra hours at work instead of going home early. Like maybe you could save an hour each day if you started using frozen beef patties instead of making fresh ones.
What's all this stuff floating in water?
That's a group taken out from the freezer. We keep it fresh frozen.
Fresh frozen?
Yes, chef.
There's no such thing. What's this in water?
It's a salmon, chef.
Frozen?
It was a fresh frozen.
But is it really worth it? I would say for 90% of new businesses, owner effort is directly related to business success. In other words, the more hours the owner puts in, the more likely the business is to do well. I think a huge misconception that a lot of new or hopeful entrepreneurs have is that if they put in 60 hours a week for the first year or 2 and they grow the business to the point that it's completely self-sufficient, they can just sit back, relax, and count money all day.
You don't really believe this. Do you believe this?
Successful owners never become complacent. They work just as hard in their 10th year as they did during the first year. The difference is that instead of spending all that time on the food truck, they use that time for bigger things, like creating new recipes, building a second food truck, training a general manager, and so on. Your back might not be as sore because you aren't on your feet all day, and you'll probably sleep much better because you don't need to sleep in the driver's seat anymore. But you'll still need to put in the same number of hours each week. The term overwork should only apply if you're working so much that your health starts to deteriorate, you can't get through the day without 10 cups of coffee, and you're constantly stressed out. So I'd recommend focusing on work only when you're at work and completely relax when you're outside of work.
Chillax.
Constantly thinking about your business, even when you're at home or on vacation, is very unhealthy and just leads to stress. If, however, you really do feel like you're overworked, perhaps you need to hire another employee to take on some of the workload. If you can't afford to do so, it probably means your sales aren't high enough yet, in which case you should rewatch the beginning of this chapter. You should also review chapters 5, 6, and 7. If you already have enough employees, maybe it means you need to start assigning them more responsibilities instead of doing all the important tasks yourself. But make sure that specific procedures are detailed in the operations manual so that every employee knows exactly what is expected of them.